Viniste a habitar, a vivir entre nosotros, sintiendo el dolor de la humanidad y a llevarnos más alto. Infinito Dios, tu vida rendiste para mi culpa borrar, mi vergüenza quitar y llevarnos más alto. Vamos de gloria en gloria en gloria. Jamás seré igual, jamás seré igual. Vamos de gloria en gloria en gloria. Gracia que cambió nuestro corazón. Tu amigo yo soy, a tu reino me has traído. Esclavo fui yo, ahora tu hijo soy y me llevas más alto. Y me llevas más alto. Vamos de gloria en gloria en gloria. Jamás seré igual, jamás seré igual. Vamos de gloria en gloria en gloria. Gracia que cambió nuestro corazón. Jesús, queremos ver tu rostro y majestad. Por siempre cantaremos santo, santo. Tu amor va más allá, no alcanzo a comprender. Por siempre cantaremos digno, digno. Jesús, queremos ver tu rostro y majestad. Por siempre cantaremos santo, santo. Tu amor va más allá, no alcanzo a comprender. Por siempre cantaremos digno, digno. La tumba venció, la muerte poder no tiene. Jesucristo triunfó y el cielo abrió y nos llevas más alto. Y nos llevas más alto. Vamos de gloria en gloria en gloria. Jamás seré igual, jamás seré igual. Vamos más alto, más alto, más alto. Gracia que cambió nuestro corazón. Gracia que cambió
Hola Iglesia, gracias por acompañarnos este domingo. Hoy vamos a ver la parte 5 de nuestra serie Cristianos, marca o movimiento, del pastor Andy Stanley. Les recordamos que esta serie la vamos a explorar en grupos pequeños. Bueno, ¿qué son los grupos pequeños? Hacemos reuniones nada más con 5 o 10 personas. Por esta ocasión vamos a hacer las reuniones en Zoom. Los miércoles va a haber un grupo solo para mujeres. Te puedes unir a un grupo los miércoles con Marisol e Ingrid, o te puedes reunir a un grupo para todos con Donna y Lalo los miércoles. Yo también los jueves voy a estar haciendo otro grupo en Zoom donde te puedes reunir. Y de veras que es una oportunidad excelente para hacer amigos, para conocer otras personas que al igual que tú están explorando la fe. Ahí puedes hacer cualquier tipo de preguntas sobre la iglesia, sobre Dios, sobre la Biblia. En fin, de verdad, te lo recomiendo, no te lo pierdes. Para ver los detalles de la reunión de Zoom de cada uno de los grupos, de los 3 grupos que vamos a tener, puedes ir a IKLESIA.mx/grupos. Por favor, aparte, el domingo 7 de noviembre a la 1 de la tarde para venir a nuestra siguiente reunión presencial. Venga con toda la familia, los esperamos.
When you open up Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and you look at the way that Jesus loved, it's in some ways, it's just like his call to follow him. It's a bit terrifying. It's a bit inconsistent. That when you look at the way Jesus loved, there's a tension there. And it's a tension that we all, to some extent, want to resolve. In fact, it's a tension that we are so uncomfortable with that many of us went to churches that were kind of on one end of the spectrum. Others of us maybe grew up in churches on the other end of the spectrum. And regardless of where you went to church, it's not that you didn't believe that what was taught was true. It's that maybe you felt like there's something missing. And maybe you went to a church that's kind of on the other end of the spectrum, and it's not that you didn't believe that what was taught was true. It's just like, it just seemed like there was something missing. And the reason is because when you open the New Testament and you ask the question, how did Jesus love? Here's what you discover. It was messy. It was inconsistent. At times you have to say, okay, that's just unfair. And at the end of the day, a lot of it's just really, really, really confusing because there's a tension. And my temptation and your temptation is to resolve the tension. And if you don't hear anything else today, hear this. If you try to resolve the tension that's created around Jesus' love, you give up something very, very, very important. And yet we are tempted to do that all the time. Now, in our churches, and for those of you who are watching for the first time, we have 7 churches in the Atlanta area, churches all over the country, and so we've been doing this for a while, and we have tried to the best of our ability to hang on to this tension. But at times it gets messy, at times we seem to be inconsistent, at times we seem to be unfair, and at times it seems to be confusing. And when we get those emails and we get those letters, I just read them and smile, and I think, maybe that's because we're doing this right. We're trying to hang on to the tension that you have when you try to love like Jesus. I'll tell you where I see expressions of this in our congregation. Many of our gay attenders not many have said to me, but I know this from conversations with some gay attenders, that they've left the predominantly gay churches to come to our churches, and on those few occasions when I felt comfortable asking why, and I'm not one to try to compare churches, here's the consistent answer I've gotten. The answer is, well, in the churches that kind of cater to gay couples, I feel like all they do is affirm my gayness, and they don't really teach the Bible. And I wanted more Bible teaching. So Andy, I've come to your church, and to be honest, it's a little scary for me. At times I feel like I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop. At times I'm wondering, how welcome I am here, but I just don't feel like I'm getting the whole truth at these other churches. And there's a tension there. There's a tension. The other place where I sense this in our congregation are on those horrible Sundays when I actually open the scripture to talk about what Jesus says about divorce and remarriage. And it's horrible. And if you're divorced and remarried, it's a bit like a root canal without any Novocaine if you're here. And I don't ever tell you when we're going to talk about it because you wouldn't come. It's so condemning. And I get the same response every time. It's like, oh, Andy, that was agonizing. I'm so glad we were there. You know, it was agonizing, but we went home and had a conversation we've never had before. It was terrible. I felt so condemned, and yet I gained insight into why we struggle the way we do in our marriage. And Andy, I felt so condemned. Is it okay that I continue to serve at the church? And the answer is yes. There's a tension there. I mean, whenever you open the scriptures and take seriously the teachings of Jesus, there's a tension. At times, he seems to be forgiving, and at other times, he seems to hold everybody accountable. At times, he's harsh, and at times, he's kind. And at times, he points out sin, and at times, it's like he ignores sin altogether. The other place where I see us feeling this tension is anytime I announce that I'm going to talk about sex or sexuality, we have like high attendance Sunday. I don't get this. I say, next week sex, it's like, boom, everybody shows up. And the thing I always wonder is, what do they think I'm going to say? Like we found the fifth gospel, you know, and Jesus said, therefore go and love the one you're with. You know, is there's going to be some kind of new insight that changes the rules, that makes everything that's been off, you know, limits, you know, okay? I mean, but you know what? Whenever we talk about sex, and it's not just me, all my friends in big churches, whenever we you know, bear down and spend a few weeks talking about sexuality, people come to church like crazy. And you know what you say? You say, oh, that was so hard. So glad I came. It dredged up things I haven't thought about in years, and I don't really want to think about. So glad you made me think about them. Andy, I hated it, but I got a copy to give my kids when they're old enough, and this is a relevant message for them. So there's a tension. There's a tension, and here's the deal. Personally and individually, we're all tempted to want to resolve that tension. But if you resolve it, you give up something important. It's what drove people crazy about Jesus, but he was comfortable with it. He was able to minister through it. And we dare not walk away from it. Even though it is messy, oh my goodness, is it messy? At times we seem to be inconsistent. At times it's confusing. And at times it leaves people thinking, I wonder what they're really about. What do they really believe? And it is our attempt. Now, John, who wrote, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and then he wrote some letters later on to the churches. John, follower of Jesus, we've talked about this before. John got to be an old man. Matthew, we think he was burned at the stake pretty early. The Apostle Paul, was probably beheaded. Peter was crucified. All the followers of Jesus were scattered and eventually became martyrs, for the best that we can tell. Some of them just disappeared into antiquity. But John was a survivor, and he grew to be an old man. And maybe 40, 45 years after the events of Jesus, it became evident that Jesus wasn't returning. Jesus said, I'm going to come back. And so they're thinking like, maybe Thursday, Friday, and you're coming back, and he didn't show up. And so years go by, and finally, probably somebody said, John, look, we appreciate the fact that you've taught us these things that Jesus said, but you're getting to be an old man, and Jesus hadn't showed up. You should write this stuff down. And so John writes what we call the Gospel of John. And so he sits down, he's an old man now, and he has all these memories and all these stories and all this stuff that he's seen, and he's seen death and sorrow and bloodshed. And he sits down to write it down, and he begins his gospel. He begins his account of the life of Jesus with this big, grand picture of Jesus being like a word, and that God sent his word, Jesus, into the world, and that word became flesh, and it took on, he was human, and he walked among us, and he ate with us. And John, he paints this beautiful picture. He says, it's as if Jesus painted a painting full of people, and then he went into the painting to interact with the people in his painting, and the people in his painting did not recognize him as the artist, and they threw him out. How powerful is that? To try to describe the conflict that he sensed among the people that Jesus came to love. And then in the opening section of that incredible piece of literature that you have in your Bible, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, he gives us the terminology, he gives us the words that best capture this tension that if you're a follower of Jesus, you're going to bump into at some point or another. If you're a follower of Jesus, it makes it messy and inconsistent and hard, and yet if you go one way or the other, you leave something out. And here are the words that he left us with. He said this. He said, the Word, talking about Jesus, became flesh and made his dwelling among us. And there's this great imagery with these three words, made his dwelling among us, that Jesus camped out with us, that Jesus moved in with us, that Jesus lived with us. And when he says us, he's not just talking about like us, 2,000 years later. He's talking about like, no, really physically like us, like me and the guys, made his dwelling with us. We, and he's not talking about you, we. He's not talking about we. He's talking about we. We, and his buds, the guys that followed Jesus, that ate and lived and talked to Jesus. We have seen. He's saying, I've seen something you haven't seen. I've seen something that you had to be there to get. I saw something, I wish I could have captured it so that you could see it as well. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son who came from the Father. And then he gives us our words, full of grace and truth, full to the brim of grace and truth. And there's the tension. Now, you know what grace is, and you know what truth is. Truth says, hey, you're accountable. Grace says, you're forgiven. Grace says, you're fine. Truth says, now you're broken. Grace says, it's going to be okay. Truth says, you're going to have to work on it. Grace says, no matter what you do, I love you. Truth says, yeah, but you're accountable. And there's a tension. And you know what? All of us through our personalities kind of lean in one direction or the other, don't we? Some of you were brought up with parents. One of them was Grace, and one of them was Mr. Ungrace, wasn't he? He was all about truth. And your parents would argue behind closed doors about how to raise you. And which one did you like better? Let me guess. Yeah, you like Gracie. I like Grace. I like I'm fine. You love me just the way I am. But if you grew up in a great home, you got a good dose of both. And here's what John said. This is so remarkable. John said, I spent years watching him navigate the intricacies of some very difficult circumstances. And as I begin my gospel, as I begin my description of what it was like to be with Jesus, here's what I saw, that he was absolutely full of both grace and truth. I want it to be one or the other. I want to push Jesus in one direction or the other. I like the verses that lean toward truth when I'm telling other people what to do. I like the verses that lean toward grace when it's about me. John said, I watched him. And the best way I can describe it is he was to the brim full of grace and truth. And then he said this, out of his fullness, we have all received grace in place of grace already given, which literally means we have all received grace upon grace upon grace upon grace, that he poured the pitcher of grace and it overflowed. We have all received grace upon grace upon grace upon grace. And then to bring us a point of clarification, he says this, for the law, we all know what the law is, for the law, like the 10 commandments plus the 600 other commandments that we find in the Old Testament, for the law was given, this is important, the law was given through Moses. We saw the movie, right? Moses comes down, he's got the 10 commandments and all the other commandments. The law was given through Moses, the law that told us that this is what God expects and here's what to do when you don't meet up to expectations. The law that said thou shalt not, and thou really shalt not. And if thou doest, then thou must go to the temple and do a sacrifice and get atonement for your sin. He said the law was given to us through Moses. And then here is a huge distinction. I think maybe John had to pause as he was writing to figure this out. How do I put this on paper? Grace and truth came. He doesn't use the word given. He uses a different term. Grace and truth came. The word was begotten. It was born. It showed up as a full package. The grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. Not the balance between. Not the balance between grace and truth. That's where we all want to live. The full measure of. Not the balance between, the embodiment of. And this is what made Jesus so messy, what made him so confusing, what in some ways made him so unpredictable. It's because everybody wants to lean one way or the other, and John said he was all of it. And he brought all of it to bear on every individual he talked to. And he brought all of it to bear into every single situation. And just when we thought he was going to go one way or the other, he was grace and truth in a body. And if you begin to read the Gospels again through that lens, you see it. One day he shows up, you know the story if you grew up in Sunday school, at this well, and a Samaritan woman comes out, and he's all alone with a Samaritan woman, and he talks to her, which you're not supposed to do. There's grace, you know. And she's like, why are you talking to me, a Jew? And I mean, you're a Jew, I'm a Samaritan. And he says, I'd like to drink some water. Would you use your jar and get some water? And she's so amazed that he's talking to her, you know, what's up with this? And then just when things are going well, he says, hey, I want you to go back into Sychar, that's the town. I want you to go back into Sychar, get your husband and bring him out. And she says, well, I have no husband. He said, I know. And then he reaches into the most painful, shameful part of her life. And he says, you've had 5. And the man you're living with now, you're not even married to him. And even Samaritans know you don't do that. You've had 5 husbands, and you either divorced them or they died. Either way, you've done a horrible job as a woman when it comes to men. You're not good with men. I was like, Jesus, hello, did you not even go to seminary? You don't say that. You don't bring up the painful, shameful parts. I mean, what I thought this was grace and truth. Where's the grace? And then Jesus, he reveals to this woman something we don't find him revealing to anyone else in all of the Gospels. He looks at her in the eyes, out alone by this well, and he says, guess who I am? I haven't told anybody this yet. I've chosen you, a Samaritan woman. You are eyeball to eyeball with the Messiah. And he said to her, and I can give you water that will quench the thirst of your soul in a way that no man will ever do it. And she leaves her jar and she goes into town. And she tells the people with whom she probably has no credibility, I have met the long-awaited Messiah of God. You hear me talk about Jesus' interaction with Matthew all the time, the tax collector. Everybody hated Matthew. I mean, you hated tax collectors. I mean, you hate them now. You really hated them back then. They were all traitors. They were Jewish traitors. There was, you know, in the New Testament, they had categories. There were tax gatherers and sinners. The tax gatherers were so bad, they couldn't even be in the category of sinners. There were tax gatherers and sinners. They had their own category. They were so bad. And Jesus says to Matthew, you know, while he's collecting taxes, I want you to join my group and follow me. To which Jesus' disciples were thinking, wait. If we have a tax gatherer in our group, people are going to think that we approve of tax gathering. Jesus, aren't you afraid that people are going to think you're approving of tax gathering by having a tax gatherer in our group? To which Jesus would have said, it's going to get worse. We're actually going to his house. And he's going to invite all of his tax gathering friends. So yeah, if you think your reputation was in jeopardy now, wait till this afternoon about 6 o'clock when the party cranks up. You're going to have no reputation in this community because everybody's going to see you mixing with tax gatherers and sinners. Jesus, doesn't it concern you that it looks like you're approving of what they do? To which Jesus would have said, what do you think I'm here for? The Son of Man came to seek and to save that which was lost. I'm not here to guard my reputation. Oh yeah. Okay, somebody write that down. I'm so confused, you know. Then if you grew up in Sunday school, you know that when he was crucified, he was crucified between 2. We were told they were thieves. They weren't thieves. They didn't crucify thieves. They crucified the worst of the worst. These are men who couldn't even be trusted to row a Roman galley. These were men who could never even be trusted to be a slave or to work in the mines. And he's crucified between 2, and one of them says, we're getting what we deserve. And you would expect Jesus to say, no, you have a good heart. You're a good man. Don't be so hard on yourself. Jesus is like, no argument there. But when you breathe your last breath, and I breathe my last breath, we're going to the same place. Today, you will be with me in paradise. Okay, wait. Hey, time out, wait. Okay, look, a few chapters ago, this young rich guy comes to you and says, I want to have eternal life. Do you remember what you told him? You said, in order to have eternal life, you have to sell everything and follow me the rest of your life. This guy gets in with 1 minute left on the clock. Okay, that's like totally unfair and confusing. Okay, wait, we've had to give up everything and follow you, and he gets in at the last minute and he can't rededicate his life. There's no point in rededicating from a cross, you know, from now on. Okay, from now on it's 20 minutes and you can't even go anywhere, okay? So this is a completely meaningless, last minute plea for mercy. And Jesus says to him, today, you'll be with me. Best of the best, worst of the worst. To me, today, we'll be together. Paradise. See, there's a tension there. And I'm just telling you, you try to resolve it, you lose something. And then maybe the most famous story of all, and it finds its way into the Gospel of John. And it's about the woman who was caught in adultery. And it's such a strange story because they bring her to Jesus and they say, Jesus, according to the law, remember the law was given through Moses, according to the law, she should be put to death, she should be stoned. And Jesus said, okay, let's what Jesus could have said, if some of you grew up in the 70s, remember snappy answers to stupid questions? Remember Mad Magazine? Nobody remembers that. Okay, anyway, I don't know if they're around anymore. What Jesus could have said, they said, hey, according to the law, she must be put to death. And what Jesus could have said is this, well, according to the Roman law, you can't put her to death. So get out of here. You can't put her to death. Don't try to trick me. But instead he says, okay, let's play to Moses' law. Let's play to the law of Moses. Stone her. And let's begin with the person who doesn't have any sin. Just try not to hit me, okay? Let's just go ahead and stone her. And let's, the person with no sin, you start. The person that has never committed adultery in your heart, you start. The person that has never looked at a woman lustfully, you start. The person thinks that, I would never, ever do that. You start. And when all of a sudden the law of Moses and the law of retribution begins to break down, and they all go away, Jesus makes everybody uncomfortable, and he looks at this woman and he says, I don't condemn you. Go and leave your life of sin. Okay, wait. Okay, which way is it? It's like I don't condemn you or you're a sinner. Yes. I don't condemn you. Now go and leave your life. Did you have to bring up the sin part? Yes. Well, then how can you say she's not condemned? Because this is how I love.